Hello, and welcome to Game Grade. On today's podcast, I'll be talking about The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. This game recently released on the Nintendo Switch system, and it's exciting to finally play as the title character in The Legend of Zelda. It's not The Legend of Link, it's The Legend of Zelda, so it makes sense you finally get to play as Zelda. It's not Super Luigi Bros, it's Super Mario Bros. It's not God of Boy, it's God of War. You play as the title character. I will never understand Miyamoto's decisions. But anyway, and this game is exciting because it's new. It's not a remake of a Game Boy game, even though Link's Awakening remake was great, and the art style is fantastic, which this game actually has the same art style. Everything, rather than looking like a painting or hyper realistic, they look like plastic toys. So they're kind of like Lego figures, but with hands instead of weird claw things. So that's great. I always like how Nintendo, which granted the Switch couldn't handle hyper realistic graphics, but I like how they always choose an art style that looks nice and it looks like fiction. Whereas if you play pretty much any PlayStation exclusive, you will see every pore on Spider Man's face and every follicle of Kratos' beard. Games are fiction. They're supposed to transport you to another world, which is what this game does really well. It feels like you're 5 years old again, playing with toys and going on a little adventure. It's great. But in this game, Zelda teams up with a little floating magic orb that is definitely not the star from Disney's Wish. I think it's called Tri, kind of like the Triforce. And it has little triangles that float behind it. It has three originally, so it's basically like some floating version of the Triforce. But it gives Zelda a Gandalf esque staff that she can use to create echoes of enemies and objects after encountering them and then scanning them. Um, and like my personal favorite combination is a floating platform. I believe it's called a plat boom or something. It has like an eye in it. It's like a cyclops platform, but it slams down to the ground and then slowly floats up. But it's too high for Zelda to jump on, so I'll spawn a trampoline echo next to it and use that and quickly jump up, and then it'll raise up so I can get above enemies and it'll crash down on them, or just skip platforming sections because otherwise you just place a bunch of beds in between the jumps, and that's kind of how you get across. It's a bit weird why they added a bunch of platforming sections in a game that is not made for platforming, but they're fun. The combat can be a little bit annoying because I'm so used to playing as Link. In these games, he has his sword, his bow, his bombs. He's very efficient at fighting. Zelda, she can just like twirl away and try not to get hit and wait for enemies to wait for the echoes to attack the enemies, which creates kind of cool combat challenges, which I would compare to kind of like the combat puzzles in Bloodborne or Elden Ring, but this is not a From Software game, and I'm glad it's not. Or otherwise, it would be an 80-hour epic, 10 of which is new gameplay, 70 of which is me dying. But yeah, it's nice to spawn in different enemies. I mainly spawn in the wolf. I don't know what it's called, but it costs 3 energy, and at this point in the game, I have 4, so I can spawn in like a, I don't know, slime or something to maybe distract enemies. But the wolf is really good because it runs around and it attacks enemies very quickly and does a decent amount of damage, as opposed to like I think they're called Borblins, which have a bit more health, do a bit more damage, but they attack very slowly. Uh, Also, the game has like quite a few puzzles. I just wish they were a bit harder, but it was probably pretty difficult to design the puzzles because this game is kind of like Tears of the Kingdom a little bit, where you can spawn in so many different items and there are infinite ways to deal with any situation. So I guess it's just kind of based on one's thought process. You can try to figure out exactly how the developers want you to do it, or you can just keep throwing items at it and it'll probably work eventually. Um, but yeah, like in Tears of the Kingdom, anytime I would get into combat, I would just spawn in what I would call a death Roomba. So I would spawn in one of the little robot things that tracked enemies and put like a flamethrower on the top. I wish I had something like that in this game. It'd be great. But instead, I have seagulls and wolves. In one of the boss fights, actually, I ran out of like the sword energy. Later in the game, you get access to Link's sword, and you can turn into a ghost of Link or something, and you can use his sword and then later the bow. I don't know about bombs. I haven't progressed that far, but that energy drains really quickly. I wish it lasted a bit longer. It would be great, but it doesn't. And I was in a boss fight once against, I think it was a gopher or something, and there was like quicksand on the ground. But in the second half of the battle, the gopher thing starts flying. And I ran out of energy for the link transformation, so I could no longer use my bow. So I had to keep spawning in some knockoff seagull, and it would die every time the enemy did an attack. It never did any damage. So I spent about 5 minutes just dodging attacks, waiting for a little bit of energy to spawn in like a pot, like a vase or something in the level, and I could destroy it and get a little bit of energy back and then kill the boss. But overall, I think the game is great. It really fosters the player's creativity with each puzzle. Like you can, I mean, of course, in any puzzle or combat puzzle, you can just turn into the Link form and kill everything, quite quickly, or you can hoard your energy until a boss fight and just spawn in a bunch of enemies that'll attack for you in most scenarios. I wish the puzzles were a bit harder, but I think this game would work really well for a younger audience. It might be quite difficult for them to comprehend the mechanics of the game and to use them in a trailer, or not a trailer, but use them in a puzzle, and that would be quite, I don't know, that would feel quite accomplishing to them. But I just finished playing a game called The Plucky Squire, which is a puzzle game and has more advanced puzzles. So I was kind of wishing this game had some of those like harder puzzle elements, but it's also a bit refreshing to have easier puzzles that you can still feel good about solving. Overall, I believe the game is great. I don't know what I would rank it out of a percentage or out of 10. Probably not a 10 out of 10, maybe like a 9, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. But it is really good. And normally in these podcasts, I will be ranking the games on a list of all the previous games that are covered on the podcast. But this is the first episode, and there is nothing to compare it against. So it's at number one because there is no number two. There is nothing but this one. So I guess we'll see how the next game I decide to cover, whenever that is, whatever game that is, we'll see how it compares to The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. Thank you for listening.